Go. Welcome back to Recruiter Radio. Your host, Kyle West. I'm joined this episode by Nadia Vatalidis, the VP of People for Remote Software, joining me from South Africa. Nadia, remote work, remote software. This is a really exciting topic. I'm so glad you were able to join me and talk about it. But first, maybe an introduction. What is remote software? What does it do? And how does it help employers to hire remotely?
Yeah, Carl, thanks so much for having me today. It sounds like you have a really interesting audience. I quickly had a look on your site to get a bit of a background and ideas of what you work on. Remote is ultimately a company. The world calls it an employer of record. I think it's so much more. But we ultimately open opportunities currently in more than 60 countries in the world for companies to hire in those 60 countries. We created all these entities ourselves, so we own these entities, unlike a lot of our competitors that might be using third parties. And basically what that creates is opportunities for all that incredible and critical talent all around the world to work at amazing companies like Remote and other tech startups or other aspirational people-first companies around the world.
Yeah, it's been a massive shift over the past couple of years, really exciting times from a recruitment perspective as we try to open up the possibilities of remote work. But if I heard you right, you said 60 countries around the world. So you're helping people from anywhere to do their jobs remotely and effectively. So in theory, you can be anywhere you want to be and work for a company through remote software. Is that the gist of it? Is that correct?
It is the gist of it. And longer term, we absolutely want to have an entity in every nook of the world. It's hard. There are countries that are sanctioned and that we absolutely can't create entities in, but those are a select few. And so our ultimate goal is to have an entity in every country in the world and to really open those opportunities everywhere. Right now, I think a lot of companies, in the tech space also has the opportunity to hire contractors in anywhere, really. And our platform has allowed for that as well. In fact, that's a large part of why Remote was built. It's a great opportunity to have a seamless opportunity to pay people, but also to invoice for the time that you've spent. And so with the entire critical talent and skilled workforce changing around the world, I think a lot of folks have chosen either a very nomad type lifestyle. Some of them want to work for multiple employers. Others, like myself, prefer building companies and being part of that journey for much longer, right? Permanently. And so we offer both options where you can have contractors that have multiple employers or multiple companies they serve and invoice at the same time. And those are more fixed term, right? So they would take on a project for 3, 6, 9, 12 months and operate via Remote and use that platform to invoice. What I'm really interested in and what I truly care about internally is if we create all these amazing opportunities with these entities and we take care of the compliance, the payroll, the tax, all those critical things that cost a lot of money, but also takes a huge administrative effort away from our employers, they can go hire this incredible talent in Kenya or the Philippines or, Nicaragua or in the middle of the US in a tiny state that's potentially not a tech state, or et cetera, right? So I think I really enjoy that. I really enjoy the fact that we are opening opportunities and that folks can start choosing where they want to work from. Very interesting fact right now. Our people team, which is my team, is very busy at the moment with relocations. So what we are seeing is even our permanent employees are opting to relocate to better opportunities, better lifestyle opportunities, better futures for their children. If they're not a parent, better opportunities for themselves and their partners, right? If their partner isn't working for a remote first company, they might want to relocate to a place where they know their partner would have a career, etc. So I think I'm just seeing lots of movement and folks really leaning into, wow, I can go work in the Netherlands instead of South Africa, or I can move to Australia instead of Canada, whatever the case may be. So I think it's just opening a ton of opportunity, really.
It really is an exciting time. I've been following on LinkedIn every day. You've got stories from remote employees or people using remote to set up their dream job in terms of scenario, whether it's a view from your office with a beach, maybe being able to put your laptop down with your toes in the sand. It's incredibly exciting. And it seems like we're on the brink of being able to say, as a recruiter to your client, wherever you want to hire the best talent, you can do that now. Wherever they are, you don't have to limit yourself to a location. But I feel like it's such a bold statement to make. Is that the progress that we're heading towards, that companies can literally hire the very best individual in the world and set them up wherever they want to work?
It's a really bold statement. There is legal compliance around that. There is work eligibility, right? That matters. And companies like us can now offer a level of sponsorship, depending obviously on eligibility and what that sponsorship requires in that country. But we've been able to unblock this in multiple countries around the world. We're also seeing that some governments have noticed that their labor law and sponsorship law is potentially 20 years old and needs to be re-looked at. And we're really optimizing when we see a change to lean into that change and to use that opportunity to start looking at sponsorship. Spain, for example, with highly skilled migrant visas, we've seen a huge influx of folks wanting to work in Spain. We've also seen that in the Netherlands for the last 4 or 5 years. Even pre-remote, I experienced that quite a bit as someone being in the people space in remote first companies for 7 years now. And so I think it is a very bold statement, but I think that is part of the future. I don't think it is, I think it's ambitious, but I don't think it's unrealistic. We are seeing a few governments even wanting to work with us. The Portuguese government, for example, more recently really leaned in and helped with the refugee programs in Ukraine and optimized remote the platform to speed up the refugee application process, right? And for a very bureaucratic environment like governments to start leaning into a more modern, tech-orientated opportunity to move faster tells me that if we start approaching countries and their governments and I nearly want to say more traditional programs, we could start helping with that change. That is incredibly ambitious, but I truly think we are thought leaders in this space. The other thought leaders that are truly standing out to me right now are recruiters. I'm noticing more and more recruiters clearly seeing opportunity in hiring in multiple locations instead of a 30-kilometer radius. And it's to their benefit as well. And so I'm seeing more and more recruiters advocating to their customers and to their clients about, hey, have you considered working with an EOR like Remote or some of our amazing competitors as well, and start opening these opportunities for them and creating that awareness with us. I follow very aspirational recruiters on LinkedIn and Twitter, and I love what I'm seeing on the conversations they are bringing to this, right? So I'm seeing a thought leader change and shift even. It's no longer just the employers that has this employer brand. Many recruiters, whether they are individual, consulting houses or working, for recruiting firms or working at companies, are starting to have those discussions as to why you should consider having global talent and the benefits of that. There's other benefits as well. If you think about your global employment costs and the average cost, if you're hiring in 60 countries instead of one, depending which that number one was, you can certainly have that opportunity where you could hire slightly more people within the same budget, right? And that doesn't mean leaning into cheap labor. It doesn't mean celebrating anything that's negative. It means being a little bit more efficient and a little bit more aware of those opportunities to hire in geolocations that are not San Francisco rates or, I would say major metropolitan cities. And so a lot of our customers are having the total rewards discussions and figuring out what does their global compensation philosophy look like? What options are they, going to consider that is financially sustainable? And so, yeah, I think there's a few companies that's helping us lead the way, like Airbnb recently, their shift certainly was a great positive surprise in the world. And I'd love to see more companies that's got that employer brand doing things like that. I think there are a few others that backtracked a bit from their work from anywhere statement as well. And it's probably because they realized, whoa, there's a big, tax risk, income tax and company liability tax risk by just saying you can work from anywhere if you don't offer the compliance and documentation that goes with that.
Yeah, I can see the challenges from that point of view, but the possibilities from the recruiting point of view. So we would always have discussions with clients about, where do you want this person to be? Are you able to pay a premium for a New York hire or a San Francisco hire? And in theory, now we can have that conversation around, look, anywhere you want to hire within this country, we can find the very best fit for your need, the absolute top level candidate that you're looking for, and they can be anywhere. And there's pushback on that. And some of the pushback, maybe I'll just throw a couple of objections at you and get your thoughts. One of them is, if you're not meeting the client face to face, you're not doing your job properly. Or if you're not having that collaborative discussion in-house with your clients, you can't do the job properly. Is that something that you can overcome with remote software and remote engagement, do you think?
Yeah, I think that statement is so traditional. Kyle, I joined GitLab back in 2016, right? And prior to that, I actually did international recruiting from a tiny home office that looked a bit like a shipping container. And I mean, I'm talking 2015, I'm talking way pre-pandemic, right? And I remember having an American client who I'm still in contact with today, and him saying, listen, I want to create an office in Cape Town. In South Africa, my head office is in Atlanta. I'm also keen to build a small team in Italy and Greece and Ukraine. And I have such amazing customers in these locations that hiring in multiple locations means I can actually get their business in those locations. This individual was really setting up offices at that point, so entities plus offices, which over this time has now actually changed. They have way more flexibility, which I'm happy to see. But at the time, this client relied purely on me to interview all these people. And at that point, it was telephonic interviews. We were heading into Skype now and again, but it was still very telephonic even based. And so I didn't even get an opportunity to see all these folks face to face. And I think realizing what recruiting is about, realizing how to have those values-based interviews and how to really lean on, what are we matching here? Are we matching company values? What are the key attributes or what are the key things we have to match for this customer? It's certainly not a job specification match any longer, right? Mm-hmm. And it hasn't been for many, many years. Mm-hmm. And I think just knowing those teams that I built and how successful that was, I think that is a traditional statement that no longer exists. I think meeting face-to-face is a privilege. I worked at GitLab, for example, for 5 years. And during that time, I think I saw my colleagues 3 times in person, literally, for very short summits at a time. And the connection we built there was so intentional. You've got to be so intentional with that social and business connection and set such clear boundaries on how you expect people to work, that I think it's absolutely possible to build amazing organizations and collaborate in asynchronous, globally remote companies. Mm-hmm. Remote, yeah. So at GitLab, I was able to help scale the company from 70 people to 1,300 in more than 65 countries. Wow. Yeah, at remote, we have scaled from 70 people when I joined to just over 1,000 people currently in more than 75 countries. Wow. And we are still creating entities for many of those countries. In fact, our country explorer page, it's called remote/country explorer, will tell you a bit about those entities and all the rules and regulations about those. And so I think that's the other part, right? If you're going to go and expand, if you are that recruiter that's a thought leader in the space, start looking at okay, but where can I find information about these countries to really enable this customer of mine that's concerned about this? And sharing pages like our Country Explorer page about Philippines, Spain, India, South Africa, Kenya, Canada, the US, and show them a little bit about, oh, this is actually what it's going to take to hire there. And it's very, very simple compared to trying to create an entity and first set up all the due diligence and compliance around that location. So I think companies like ours are certainly making it easier. On the collaborative side, there is certainly a huge part of intention and being deliberate to build connection in these companies, to create belonging, to build a specific values-based environment. Some people might still call it a culture, a company culture. I don't call it that any longer because we have so many cultures at Remote. So we call it values, a values-based environment and alignment to these values. But I think the companies that aren't doing it, that are focusing on that 30-kilometer radius, I think they are going to start losing critical talent.
Oh, yeah.
Their top engineers, their top product folks, their top designers are going to start thinking about, but I want to work at a company where I can work with 75 nationalities, right? I want to be in a creative space where I have flexibility to do yoga at 10 a.m. or to, end my Friday early and start my Monday earlier. And so I think the more traditional focus is slowly disappearing, and it's just creating more opportunities for companies like ours.
Yeah, and there's a pushback. So I'll tell you a story about a sales leader here in Toronto. He told me something shocking, that he lost 12 people from his team in a month because the company, who shall remain nameless, tried to implement a 3-day in the office mandatory work week. And everyone who had been used to working from home said, no way, I'm not going back to that. I control my schedule. I'll come to the office when I want to and need to. We can have agreement on what requires me to be in the office, but you can't just tell me I'm going to have to be here 9 to 5 just because you want me there. And that's the attitude that people are pushing back hard on now. So we went from how is this going to work? How are people going to be trusted to work from home, to this very defiant stance from the employees who are saying, you can't tell me to come to the office anymore. I'm going to go work for an American startup. I'm going to go work, maybe with a company that's enabled by remote software. I'm going to go have that relationship with my employer now on my terms. So there's a massive shift, because not that long ago, if you told somebody you can only come to the office 3 days a week, most people would have said, hey, that's great. You should be on top of the best companies to work for list, and now it's gone completely the other direction where nobody wants to be told when to come to the office. Such a dramatic shift. You must have seen such a dramatic growth from your side, but is there now a pushback from companies who maybe are lacking a bit of trust with their employees? Are companies able to trust their employees to the point where they can let them work from home on their own recognizance? Or is there going to be more surveillance software built into this type of remote arrangement? Do you see surveillance as being a big issue? And how do companies really trust their employees now?
Yeah. So this that you just mentioned, these 12 folks, I have to say it matches our metrics, right? In Q1 alone in 2022, and I looked at this recently, we had 60,000 applications on average a month.
Wow.
Right. And I mean, for a small company, and I'm calling us small, we're 1,000 employees, but compared to other giant enterprise companies and big names, tech names around the world, we are still small. And seeing 60,000 applications on average does mean it brings a lot of pressure to our recruiting team, right? It does show clearly that people are very attracted to work for companies like ours. Mm-hmm. And the amount of reach out we're getting is hard to even respond to. And we absolutely aspire to get back to everybody. But it's a clear sign that people do want the flexibility that we, for example, offer, but many of our industry peers, even competitors, are starting to offer. And I've started noticing is a massive benefit. I think flexibility in itself is still the biggest benefit in the world, right? Being able to manage your own time. And with that flexibility does come trust. What I've seen at Remote, what I've seen at GitLab when I was there during my nearly 5 years, is that people never want these benefits to go away. And so the amount of people that does abuse like flexibility as a benefit is so low, because the majority of folks that work at a company like Remote or GitLab or Zapier or all these other companies that are remote only or remote first, is that they don't want to lose that benefit. So they will prove to the world, but also to themselves and to the company and to their managers, that they can absolutely be trusted to get stuff done. The productivity I've seen in people teams are just incredible. The amount of things we do in a quarter is well beyond what I've seen in office, 8 to 5, Monday to Friday, very rigid environments. And I've worked with many of those as even previous customers. And so I think flexibility does come with trust. And I don't think that connection is always made by leaders. But if there's no buy-in into this very flexible model, and you don't set very clear boundaries and you don't write down how, or you don't explain how it will work, I think it can create a lot of confusion and vagueness, and that can lead to distrust and potentially underperformance, right? So I think there's a huge effort that has to be made. That effort is very simple. It's also not more complicated than what we need to make it out to be, right? You can look at our public handbook. A lot of that is written by many of us here at Remote, and we can all continue writing and updating it. But I think it's about, what are the boundaries we're working in? So if I let you work from home, what does that look like? What is my expectations of you? How do I follow up with you? How regular do I check in with you? Do we have weekly one-on-ones? Do we have bi-weekly one-on-ones? Am I stretching my managers too thinly? Is one manager having 50 people? Because you can't expect them to have weekly one-on-ones then, right? That's going to take up basically their entire week. Yeah. And so I think it's nearly like rethinking organizational design and start flattening it and start simplifying, and then looking at, right, if I have one manager for 10 employees, that can work if they check in weekly. And if 1 week goes by and there's been no productivity, it's a clear sign to that manager that there's something wrong here. Or if the person's not showing up, it's a fast check-in. It's not months or quarters that go by where you have someone that you've been feeling like you've distrusted, or that there's a underperformance, underproductive type scenario. So I think it's all about the boundaries and things you put in place. And those aren't that difficult to do, but I don't know if a lot of companies did that during the pandemic, and if they were willing to lean into that.
Yeah.
And so that to me has been, game changing to experience. And Kyle, it certainly changed my entire career. I was an entrepreneur, for 15 years prior to GitLab. I had my own little business. I was an executive coach. And I did recruiting prior for many, many years. I also helped build small companies, from entity and up, and help them with their entire sort of business administration and HR. But if I didn't get the opportunity at GitLab, I would probably still do the exact same thing I did then, with the exact same clients in that 30-kilometer radius. And I don't know what would have happened during the pandemic. Yeah. But the opportunity this has created for my career in stepping into a San Francisco, Silicon Valley-based startup that was hiring remotely in 2016 had a completely different outlook. And also it gave a South African female with very little international opportunity an opportunity to earn stock in a company that eventually IPO'd. And so I think that's the picture I'm seeing, that I hope more companies can see. It's really about that critical talent and global wealth and creating opportunity versus let's focus on the 30-kilometer radius and whatever's best in that space. And that might not be the best talent, the most experienced folks that you need. Yeah. And then on the engineering side, I just want to share this, something I've been thinking about a lot lately and I'm consulting on, is that, if you're hiring Ruby engineers or chef engineers or whatever the case may be, developers with a very specific language requirement, if you can hire in 60 or 75 countries, you can really go, where are those chef communities? Where are those Ruby communities? Let me go find them.
Mhm.
And if they are in Poland, Ukraine, I'm mentioning Ukraine, I understand that's a very difficult space right now, and I have a lot of empathy for that. But depending where they are, right, a specific state in the US, if you start picking your tech locations aligned to those program languages or whatever you're hiring for, all of a sudden, your opportunity to fill that role is so much higher, but you're also bringing people to your customer that they would have never found in their 30-kilometer or 50-kilometer radius. And so that excites me. And I think it's something that companies need to be more aware of.
Yep. Yeah, we used to talk about benefits, and we used to think of benefits as medical, dental, vacation time. Now I'm getting candidates coming to me with requests for remote only or remote first as their primary benefit. I'm even getting conversations started with candidates who say, I want to work only remote. I don't want to go commute anywhere ever again. This is something that is quite challenging at this time from a recruiting perspective, because there is a division between remote first or remote only and companies that are adopting a hybrid model and companies that are pulling back towards a more traditional model. Where do you see this going in terms of the division between I want to hire and work with only remote candidates and companies that are pulling back from that? Do you think there might be a lashback from traditional companies? Do you think there might be a market shift where they can start to implement traditional values and say, if you want to work for us, we're a great company, but we need you in the office. We want to see you. Is that a possibility, or are these traditional companies really dinosaurs that are going extinct?
In my world, it's very much around the dinosaur behavior that I truly struggle with. And I'm very thankful I'm not a candidate in the market right now, because I would absolutely be very difficult and say remote first is the only option for me. I don't see myself ever commuting to an office anywhere, no matter where I live, no matter what I'm doing at that point. I haven't seen that for a really long time, and I don't want to go down that route again. But I will say, I think the next 2 years is going to be quite chaotic when it comes to changes and shifts and decisions. And I do think a few companies are going to get a bit rigid, because they might have this plan that they want to work towards, and that plan might not fit into this model that everyone else wants, that everyone else got to experience. I would like to see more flexibility and lean towards, but let's get someone that's an expert in the space to consult to. Let's partner with a company that understands how this should be done. And if we go hybrid, let's do it the right way. Let's work asynchronously. Let everyone show up, on their own screens. Let the folks that want to come into the office come into the office. Let's reduce that space and create more housing, whatever the case may be, right? Mm-hmm. At the same time, I do think with the economy changes right now, and with a slight shift, if you look at the sort of stock market and all the things going on in the market and a few things collapsing a little bit, I do wonder if those rigid companies aren't going to get away with it, to say, listen, this is the opportunity, and the other opportunities becoming a little bit lean over the next 6 to 12 months. Mm-hmm. Just because we all just stepped out of a horrible pandemic. Well, we're not out of it yet. We're still in it, touch wood. It stays the same and gets better, not worse. Mm-hmm. But if we look at what's in front of us right now, people are starting to want to go back to a new normal or their previous normal. And I do think with the changes in the market, some of these companies will get away with it, because some folks might not get that opportunity with that remote company because they might be in a more sustainable mode this year. And so I think it is, again, about flexibility and really deciding longer term, what is it that you want? What is it that you want from your career? And if that does mean short term going back to the office, potentially working with people teams and HR teams to say, right, if you want me in the office 3 times a week, can you explain what that looks like? Can we get flexibility around that? Can it be any 3 days? And are we doing a a people first hybrid model, or are we doing just a business first hybrid model, right? And I think that's how people can then make decisions and choose between, if there isn't offers, let's make sure they operate in a people first way, that they are considerate of flexibility, etc. as well, but they're giving us space to get together. That's not something remote will be doing. We signed a pledge to say we are staying remote first, and our name says it all, for as long as the future exists for this organization. And that is a huge part why I'm here. But at the same time, I do think the environment and the dynamic of organization is quite chaotic right now. And I am seeing a bit of redundancies at some companies. I'm certainly seeing some changes in the way people are hiring. And so I do wonder if that's not going to have a side effect on this push for, I only want to work for remote first companies. I, of course, back that, but I know that can be difficult depending on the location and search. Then again, I am seeing amazing new startups all over popping up, more funding going into new exciting organizations and apps and tech companies. So I don't think the opportunities are going to go away. I just don't know if they're going to be as rife as what they have been the last 2 years.
Yeah. Well, if you want the job, you better commute. I think we've all been there in our careers. I know I suffered through a few years of commuting that in hindsight just seems so repressive and cruel. Working for someone who said, I want to see you in the office 8:30 every morning. If you want this job, you better do that. Whereas opposed to now, and I know you share this joy, and I can hear it in your voice when you talk about it. It's such a delight to be remote, be in an environment that, whatever your dream home is, for me, it's a log cabin in the woods. It's different for everybody, but you get to live your best life. I've never been happier. I've never been healthier. I've never felt more appreciative and connected to people. But here's the potential downside from a mental health point of view. Some people are just wired differently. We're all wired differently, I should say, but some people are just not able to be isolated and remote. They need to have that connection. They need to have an interaction. Do you think that there needs to be evaluations for people who want to work remote? Maybe they just can't do it. Maybe they just don't have the mental alignment to allow them to work remote. And is there a mental health risk for isolation that comes with working remote?
Yeah, look, I don't think the pandemic helped with the isolation part. And
No.
I think what a lot of companies experienced, and I've said this before, and what a lot of people experienced was remote forced, right? And that is very isolating. And that is not what we're building at remote. That's not remote first. And that feeling was very much, not only were you isolating because of COVID and sort of forced to stay in the same place, you were also all of a sudden working in a completely different way. And so how a lot of people experienced it from a mental health perspective was very, very lonely, right? I personally really struggled with isolation. I've had COVID twice, also really struggled through that and not being able to go anywhere or leave my home. I did do it, but it was really difficult. What I think is different is, imagine not having to spend your social time with your colleagues, but having lunch with a parent or your really close friend or a community, or joining meetups in your area and actually growing your career, fighting the loneliness by meeting like-minded people in your area of expertise. So what I've seen remoters are doing, because this is truly our way of working, it wasn't forced, it was already built with a very thoughtful, meaningful way, was I'm seeing a lot of remoters signing up for community-related projects, whether that is volunteering, donation, a reading project at a school, or where they actually lean into the learning and development aspect of joining a local meetup in Ruby on Rails, building that connection, right? Investing in their personal growth and coding ability, right? And then as part of their growth plan, adding that to their career growth plan. And all of a sudden, they're combining the opportunity to socialize, fight loneliness, and being isolated in one place, with career growth, opportunity to meet other people in their like-minded space, right, that can challenge and help them grow and connect on that level. Something else I've also seen is we have a very small budget for this. I'm hoping to improve that in future, but we do have a social budget where you can meet up with another remoter and, a certain dollar amount is on us. And so I've seen a ton of remoters meeting up and rather getting together socially in their respective locations instead of working together in a cubicle, in a building. And so it's a very different perspective when you can rather have lunch with all these amazing folks and then go home and work versus sitting together the whole day and potentially not actually engaging. So that accidental social connection that you get at work is missing from a remote company, but you've got to create that in a very meaningful, intentional way. And so you can do that by switching your budget towards things like that instead of having an office, right? And considering we don't have a massive travel budget because we don't all travel for work all the time, we can then use budget we would allocate towards that instead to more social connection opportunities and events relating to that. It is much harder if you're in a country where you're completely on your own. And I absolutely recognize that. What we do here is, we try and meet individual needs as well. So if someone is in a very, very remote rural location that wants to travel to meet other remoters, we would absolutely look at their individual need and see if we can match a travel plan for them to meet other remoters. So I think it's about flexibility and figuring out what's going to work for the most of the company. And then what are these odd unique expectations we need to create or opportunities we need to create. But yeah, it certainly helped me to do a bit of volunteering for all kinds of interesting things and to start thinking about life very differently. It's also given me the freedom to make space for me and my mental health. And so if I want to every day start my day, outside doing yoga at 8 a.m., I didn't commute for an hour, right? And now I'm potentially sitting in Johannesburg sun on my yoga mat at a time where everyone is sort of still rushing to get to the office. And that's a different side of mental health. But again, I did it intentionally. I'm allowed to do that. I have the flexibility to do that. And I think that's what companies need to consider. And maybe recruiters could advocate for that a bit more to their customers and become that thought leader partner in that space.
Yeah, well, that's actually a good segue to what I wanted to ask you around how do you advocate for that? So let's pretend that you're the recruiter and you are convincing your client to hire remote. What's the pitch? What's the points you need to cover? How do you get your clients to buy into this? How would you help me be a thought leader in remote work? I'm on board. How do you sell it?
That's tough. I haven't sold for years, so I'm going to try my best here. I think I would really start by saying, can you imagine they have this really difficult role. They're looking for someone that has sold a very specific SaaS software before. And that market potentially exactly, and exactly which companies in your region are doing that, right? Imagine saying to your customer, have you ever heard of this other very aspirational SaaS brand? Well, guess what? I'm connected to a bunch of their senior sales executives. And these folks are incredible. They are critically talented. They have way more experience than what we've seen in this current market, 30-kilometer radius, X country. Why don't I schedule just an exploratory discussion with one of them that I think could be a really good alignment to what you're building in this amazing company, right? And so you start off probably quite casually. And I think as a next step, I would start saying, have you read this article in Forbes, or have you seen this podcast about the flexibility of work? And I know you have to convince your CEO and you have to convince your people team, depending if you're working with a people team or not. But why don't we get a bunch of the managers of your company together and talk about this? And let me just share a little bit about what I've experienced with this other customer that is hiring in 60 countries, and I'll invite them and explain a bit about what's working. Now, funny enough, Kyle, it's a huge pitch that works at Remote. I have sales folks at Remote that are true thought leaders, but they often invite me to some of their customer discussions because chances are I had the exact same problem when I was at GitLab when I needed to hire in 65 countries. Then the HR folks sitting in front of me needing to choose an EOR or deciding if they should create an entity or not and just stay in one country. I might have had that experience already or that problem already. And so adding someone to that conversation that is experienced, that has gone through this, is very helpful. So I think it's about building those communities and partnerships. There are many amazing communities. If you ever want suggestions, I'd happily add them. But I think that it's that opportunity to align with folks that are maybe not another recruiter, but have done consulting work in the space, that is a thought leader in the space, that can speak to someone about why. And backing that with really good data, articles, resources. And that enables the company to make better decisions. At your level, I expect you to work with a lot of CEOs, and amazing C-level folks. So I can imagine you can have those conversations with the right people off the bat, which might be a privilege, and for others, not so much. But it is about influencing the right folks to start getting the conversation across. And I think it is a healthy change. I think it's people first. I think it's got a way more human-centric approach than just saying 30-kilometer radius, take it or leave it. You have to be at the office at 8 to 5 p.m. and nearly forget about what we've all just gone through and the fact that it still worked, the fact that we still have companies, the fact that we are still able to be productive and get things done. So, yeah, and then there's tons of open source content, which I'm a huge advocate for. I love creating in public, and I'm building a ton of things in public. And there's more and more companies that does that. Recruiters can use that open source content to their advantage and say, well, here's a handbook you can take a look at. Look at this anti-harassment policy that's public that a candidate can see before they join a company. Is that not something you want to create? Client. And so I think there's opportunity to lean a bit towards partnering, collaborating, community in the space.
Yeah, and it becomes a major point of talent attraction. I would, if I was able to consult with clients who are starting up and growing their business, maybe a point of discussion becomes, well, what is your remote policy? What is your work from home policy? That's what people are interested in. That's what they want to hear about first. Medical, dental, vacations, all the same. But if you can help people to understand your flexibility range with their work from home, and if you can understand how to maximize a company like Remote to hire truly global talent, hire the best developers, the best engineers, the best pre-sales people, whatever you're looking to hire, you can now expand that search. I mean, there is a talent shortage in Toronto right now. Companies are scrambling to try and hire here because there's just not enough people. Maybe the solution is to, with the partnership of a company like Remote, expand that search. Go outside, go to other regions and find that talent that you're looking for.
Absolutely. I'll add one more thing that I think that I don't know if I brought across already, but I think ultimately companies might have remote policies, right? And it's okay for a recruiter to say, I want to challenge you a little bit and I want to show you this other policy that, might be meaningful to you. And I know how much you care about finding amazing people to work with you. And I think what it does then is really helping folks to create those new policies, because a lot of companies just don't know where to start. And so when you help companies to connect the dots, I think that's very meaningful. What I've seen through some of our partners at Remote is our partner companies, pulling one of us in and saying, I have a customer that's using our product for this. They really don't know where to start with global PTO. They don't know where to start with parental leave globally. They've always done it for the US or they've always done it for the UK, but they want to engage a EOR or remote, but they don't know where to start. And I think that is where thought leadership can come in, and where that partnership can help change and shift that mindset to become more flexible, to open opportunities, and to say, but hold on, here is a policy you can take a look at, or here's some really interesting information that you might be able to use when you create your remote working policy, especially if someone says, oh, we don't have one, right? Because I've also heard that. And so where I usually start is asking things like, do you maybe need help with your global PTO policy? Because I've found this amazing resource that I think could be helpful to you if you are starting to think about building global teams. And that just helps things along, because all of a sudden it becomes aspirational and it becomes an inspiration. And it's an opportunity to look at something and go, oh my gosh, we can absolutely do that, instead of staring away from it. I think the biggest thing is people just don't realize how much compliance and administrative work we take away, even from a payroll perspective. And that's something, our customers have certainly now discovered, and many of them would rather grow in more countries that we have entities in versus even their own, trajectory or plan. And so it's interesting to see how they work with us. They now kind of follow, oh, where are you going next? We want to go there, right? So if you're going to be opening an entity in Singapore or Japan or whatever, we'd rather go in that direction than focusing on our own plan, because we want to work with you. It makes it simpler. And so, I think that's really been what's working for us.
Yeah, well, it's a great discussion. Thank you so much, Nadia, for joining me. I really appreciate your insights. It's truly inspiring and exciting. And the future is remote, and remote is the future. I am on board. We'll see if the traditionalists have their way. But I think that, from what I'm hearing from candidates, they want remote, they want work from home, they want control of their schedule, and they're not going to back off on it. So it's going to be a very interesting time, but this is certainly going to educate and share the message. So I really thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Kyle. Enjoy the colder weather in Canada.
Well, it's warming up there, and it's warming up here. So we're just about level when it comes to weather. But thank you again.
Good stuff.
Really enjoyed
nice to
having
connect.
you.